Before we actually get to the sickbay scene, which I know everybody's excited for, I wanted to talk a little bit about where Kirk and Spock are at by the time the sickbay scene happens. So we're going to chat about the motion picture for a little bit. Now, I got pretty snarky and pretty sarcastic with the skeptics in the previous segments, but to be fair, they've been getting pretty snarky and sarcastic with us for a long time now, in pretty nasty ways. So if any of that just happens to come out while I'm talking, that's just kind of frustration coming out sideways. But anyway, the motion picture. Now I'm going to be very straightforward with this discussion because I'm just going to lay the theory out there, because if I take a lot of time going, well, blah, 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 then it's going to take 20 minutes instead of 10. So I'm just going to lay it all out there, and then you can look over everything I've said and see if you think it fits or not. Okay, Spock, at the beginning of the motion picture, is on Vulcan, and he's pursuing Kalinar. He's trying to purge all emotion. Now, we never find out why. He's never asked. It's never brought up. It's just conveniently ignored. There are a few things in this movie that are conveniently ignored for seemingly no reason. Like, even in the worst movie, these questions would be answered, right? But they're ignored because if they were actually addressed, then that would be way too much gay. Way too much gay. They would have to actually talk about out in the open what's going on between Kirk and Spock. And that just couldn't happen in 1979. It couldn't happen today, actually, but anyway. So Spock is trying to purge all emotion, and he's on Vulcan. And it doesn't really work out, because when the moment of truth comes and the master dude mind melds with him, Spock actually thinks about Kirk. And he kind of picks up on some of Kirk's thoughts. Now, we know this because it happens in the novelization of the motion picture, which was written by Gene Roddenberry. So we can all accept that as law, I think. That's one thing we can agree on. So he thinks about Kirk. And then the High Master Vulcan says, your answers aren't here. They're not here. Kalinar is not the right thing for you. You need to go find your answers elsewhere. And so Spock, having kind of picked up on the presence of a supremely logical machine, which has come to be known as V'ger, he decides to go after that, because that's pure logic. That should have the answers. And in order to do that, he has to go back to the Enterprise, because the Enterprise is going after V'ger as well. And when he gets there, it's very clear he's not too happy about that. He doesn't really seem to like being back on the Enterprise. He's pretty much acting like a pissy queen. Like, he's not being even remotely polite to anybody, especially Kirk. I mean, when he gets there and Kirk and Spock's eyes meet for the first time, nobody moves. Nobody moves, nobody breathes for a couple of seconds, and then Spock just goes on to what he was doing. He completely ignores Kirk's presence. Now, that's weird. I mean, even if they were just friends, they were really good friends. He wouldn't just completely ignore Kirk's presence. It's very clear from that scene that whatever the hell happened that made Spock want to pursue Kalinar was Kirk's fault. It was Kirk's doing. Now, what could happen between Kirk and Spock that would make Spock want to purge all emotion? Long story short, Kirk finally made his move. And Spock kind of had a little freak out because he's half Vulcan, and he's been trying to embrace logic, and then here comes along this tidal wave of emotion, and so he runs off to Vulcan to pursue Kalinar. But now he's back, and he's not very happy about this. And he's trying to find answers. Now, we don't find out what those questions are. That's another thing that's conveniently ignored, is what are the questions? We find out the answer he finds. We hear that in the sickbay scene, but we never hear what the questions are, which is kind of interesting. It's never even alluded to. It's, again, conveniently ignored. And it's probably conveniently ignored because he's trying to figure out if he should embrace logic or Kirk, really. That's kind of what it's coming down to. And so he's looking for answers. He mind melds with V'ger, and that puts him in sickbay. So that's where he's at when we come to the sickbay scene. He's just figured out the answers to life, the universe, and everything. And that's where he is come the sickbay scene. Now, Kirk has been having a very different experience. And when you think about it, during the lost years, between the original series and the first movie, he finally makes his move on Spock. He's waited years to do it. He finally does it. He puts himself out there, and Spock leaves. Spock freaks out and goes. Presumably never to be seen again. That's big. You finally make a move on the love of your life, if I can speak, and he leaves. That's kind of heartbreaking. And then Kirk gets control of the Enterprise again. He's back in command. He's back to being a captain, but he's not being a very good captain. Something's off. And then Spock gets back to the Enterprise, and all of a sudden he's Captain Sexy Pants again. Like, everything's fine. He's back to being his normal captain-y self. That's a bit of a correlation, if you ask me. But besides the captain aspect, I mean, now Spock's back, and so let's hope. Yes! But then Spock's acting like a pissy queen, so that's, oh, no, crap. And so Kirk's going through this tug of war. He makes a move, he gets rejected. Never going to see him again. Spock's back, but with a complete wall up between them. So he doesn't really know how to feel. And that's where he's coming from by the time the sickbay scene rolls around. So that's kind of a bit about where they're going, respectively, by the time we get to the sickbay scene. So now, actually, I think we might be able to finally talk about that scene.